Talking about here on my channel right now. It's all about Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively's.
Even more troubling is Blake's team's decision to subpoena over 100 content creators who discussed the case online. 107, to be exact. This move crossed a line for many observers. It wasn't about correcting misinformation. It was about intimidation. About sending a message that anyone who questioned Blake's narrative could face legal consequences. That tactic backfired almost immediately. Instead of silencing criticism, it amplified it. People began asking why a supposedly strong case needed to scare independent commentators into silence. The answer seemed obvious. Because public scrutiny was exposing holes that legal arguments could not fill. Throughout all of this, Ryan Reynolds' role has become increasingly difficult to ignore. Publicly, he remains silent, projecting the image of a supportive but detached husband. Privately, industry insiders suggest a very different reality. One where Ryan is actively involved in managing optics, leveraging relationships, and ensuring that Blake's version of events remains dominant in entertainment media. This isn't surprising. Ryan has built a career not just on acting, but on branding. He understands narrative control better than most. And yet, even his influence has limits. Hollywood connections can't change what's written in sworn testimony. They can't redact reality when it's spoken aloud in court. As trial approaches, Blake's team appears increasingly frantic. Motions pile up. Accusations escalate. The language grows more dramatic, not less. This is not the behavior of a legal team confident in its case. This is the behavior of people trying to delay an inevitable reckoning. Every redaction, every sealed document, every press leak buys a little more time. But time is no longer Blake's ally. With each unsealed transcript, the picture becomes clearer. Baldoni's team shows up prepared, focused, and grounded in evidence. Blake's team shows up angry, defensive, and obsessed with perception. The public has noticed the shift. Early sympathy has evaporated. Comment sections that once echoed support are now filled with skepticism. People are questioning why Blake's team relies so heavily on buzzwords instead of facts. Why every supposed bombshell collapses under scrutiny. Why the judge consistently refuses to validate her framing of events. This isn't a coordinated backlash. It's organic. It's what happens when a story is pushed too far without the substance to support it. Perhaps the most damaging development for Blake is the growing perception that she is not merely exaggerating, but actively manipulating. Manipulating the media. Manipulating public emotion. Manipulating legal procedures. The repeated redactions of public hearings, the selective leaks, the inflammatory language used in filings that never holds up in court, all point to a single strategy: control the narrative at all costs. But narratives are fragile things. They require maintenance. And once they start to crack, they tend to collapse all at once. Justin Baldoni, meanwhile, has taken a markedly different approach. Instead of flooding the press, his team has focused on building a record. Expert witnesses. Documented timelines. Professional conduct. It's not flashy. It doesn't generate viral headlines. But it holds up under scrutiny. And in a courtroom, that matters far more than trending topics. While Blake's side throws accusations, Baldoni's side stacks receipts. That contrast is becoming impossible to ignore. This case is no longer just about what happened on a film set. It's about credibility, power, and the misuse of influence. Blake Lively entered this fight assuming her status would carry her through. That her image, her platform, and her connections would outweigh the need for airtight evidence. For a while, that assumption seemed correct. But now, the tide has turned. Judges are unimpressed. The public is skeptical. And the closer this case gets to trial, the less room Blake has to maneuver. There is a moment in every legal battle where strategy gives way to reality. Where the noise fades and only the facts remain. Blake Lively is approaching that moment fast. When she takes the stand, there will be no redactions. No carefully crafted leaks. No friendly headlines to soften the blow. Just questions, answers, and a jury watching closely. Ryan Reynolds won't be able to spin it. PR teams won't be able to intervene. Hollywood won't be able to shield her. Reality will speak for itself. What began as an attempt to frame Justin Baldoni as a villain has instead exposed a troubling pattern of manipulation, exaggeration, and desperation. Blake Lively didn't just gamble her reputation on this case. She put it on the line. And with every failed motion, every rejected accusation, every unsealed transcript, that gamble looks worse. The truth doesn't need hype. It doesn't need redactions. It doesn't need headlines to survive. It just needs time, and time is running out for Blake Lively. The trial is coming. The evidence is stacking. The narrative she tried so hard to control is slipping through her fingers. This isn't the victory lap she imagined. It's the slow, public unraveling of a case built more on performance than proof. When the gavel finally falls, it won't matter who shouted the loudest or leaked the fastest. It will matter who told the truth. And right now, all signs point in one direction. As the case drags deeper into its second year, the cracks in Blake Lively's strategy are no longer subtle. They're loud, public, and impossible to ignore. What once looked like a carefully staged accusation has begun to resemble a desperate attempt to outrun the consequences of a story that can no longer hold itself together. Every new filing, every media leak, every frantic motion only adds another layer to the same uncomfortable truth. Blake Lively is losing control of this narrative, and no amount of redactions, headlines, or celebrity influence can stop what's coming next.
I've played
The legal system moves slowly, but it has a way of catching up with people who try to bend it for spectacle instead of substance. One of the most explosive accusations Blake ever made was the claim that Justin Baldoni crossed a physical boundary, specifically alleging that he nibbled her lip without consent. That allegation didn't just shock the public, it defined the early perception of this entire case. It was emotional, visceral, and perfectly designed to trigger outrage before any evidence could be examined. The timing of that claim was not accidental. It emerged right as Blake was doing press, right after a major media piece framed her as a victim, and right when public attention was at its peak. But now, buried inside court filings and whispered among people close to the case, a very different version of events is emerging. According to multiple sources tied to Baldoni's defense, that incident either never happened or was initiated by Blake herself. Even Baldoni's early filings hinted at this, using the careful legal language of projection, suggesting she accused him of behavior that mirrored her own actions. If that interpretation holds, it doesn't just weaken her case. It obliterates her credibility. This is where Blake's legal strategy truly begins to look reckless. Allegations of physical misconduct are not minor claims. They're nuclear. Once you make them, you can't quietly walk them back. And yet, the further this case progresses, the less Blake's team seems willing to anchor that accusation in hard evidence. No contemporaneous complaints. No corroborating witnesses. No documentation that aligns with the severity of the claim. Instead, there's silence, deflection, and an increasing reliance on emotional language rather than factual support. The accusation did its job early on, flooding the media cycle and cementing an image of Baldoni as the aggressor. But now that the spotlight has shifted to the courtroom, that same accusation has become a liability. Because in court, emotion isn't enough. Proof matters. When Baldoni attempted to push back publicly by suing the New York Times for defamation, many assumed it was a sign of weakness when the case was dismissed. But that interpretation ignores a crucial reality of American law. Suing a major media outlet is almost impossible. The legal bar is extraordinarily high, especially when the reporting is framed as opinion or sourced to allegations rather than facts. Baldoni's loss there wasn't a validation of Blake's story. It was a reflection of how protected media institutions are. Blake and Ryan Reynolds understood this perfectly. They used it to their advantage, turning the press into a shield. They knew that even if the narrative was misleading, it would be nearly impossible to challenge legally. So they leaned into it. A year later, the cost of that strategy is becoming painfully clear. Blake's story is riddled with inconsistencies. Her legal filings contradict her media statements. Her accusations expand and contract depending on what's convenient at the moment. And each time her team cries misconduct, the court responds with indifference or outright rejection. Judges are not swayed by tabloid framing. They're swayed by evidence, consistency, and credibility. Blake's team has struggled on all three fronts. The pattern is now undeniable. Whenever Baldoni's side gains momentum in court, Blake's team responds not with stronger arguments, but with louder accusations. They accuse Baldoni's lawyers of bullying. They claim harassment. They frame standard legal procedures as emotional abuse. But when those claims are examined, they fall apart. Take the 9-page transcript Blake's team submitted to demonstrate a pattern of misconduct. On its face, it sounds damning. In reality, it's mostly her attorney interrupting proceedings, arguing about break times, and escalating minor disagreements into full-blown confrontations. That's not proof of abuse. That's proof of chaos, and it's chaos coming from Blake's side. Behind all of this, Ryan Reynolds looms quietly but significantly. Industry sources suggest he's been deeply involved behind the scenes, using his influence to help shape the narrative and protect Blake's image. There are even whispers that personal jealousy may have played a role in igniting this conflict, stemming from Blake developing a crush on Baldoni during production. Whether that's true or not, what's undeniable is that Ryan has a vested interest in how this plays out publicly. While Blake files motions and redactions, Ryan works connections, ensuring that sympathetic coverage appears when it's needed most. It's not a legal strategy. It's a media strategy. And it only functions as long as the public doesn't look too closely. Things took an even darker turn when Blake's team began targeting Dr. Nicole Alexander directly. Instead of accepting her professional opinion, they went after her credibility. They accused Baldoni's team of coaching her. They complained about interruptions. They demanded additional questioning, not because procedure required it, but because they didn't like her answers. Dr. Alexander made it clear that claims of psychological harm require more than subjective feelings or isolated comments. That position threatened the foundation of Blake's case. So Blake's team tried to discredit the messenger. They buried her testimony under redactions. They framed her deposition as compromised. And they ran straight back to the media with twisted summaries, knowing full well that most readers wouldn't compare those claims to the actual transcript. This isn't how people behave when they're confident in the strength of their evidence. This is how people behave when they're trying to control damage. When the truth doesn't serve your story, you don't adjust your story, you attack the truth. Blake thought she could get away with it. She assumed the combination of celebrity status, sympathetic headlines, and strategic leaks would overpower the dry reality of court documents. But the internet noticed. Legal commentators noticed. And eventually, the judge noticed too. The courtroom doesn't care about vibes or narratives. It cares about facts. And Blake's team keeps coming up short. What makes this even more revealing is how aggressively Blake's side has tried to fight this battle in the press rather than in court. Right after filing the sanctions motion, they leaked it to multiple outlets simultaneously. Variety, Daily Mail, People. The language was identical across articles, clearly sourced from the same talking points. Headlines screamed about inappropriate questions and alleged sexual misconduct. But the underlying documents didn't support those claims. It was SEO manipulation. Trigger words designed to attach Baldoni's name to scandal across search results. A calculated attempt to poison public perception before Baldoni could respond. And for a few hours, it worked. Panic spread. Speculation exploded. Then the real documents dropped. And the narrative collapsed. This pattern repeats itself over and over. Accusation first. Evidence later. Correction never. Blake's team relies on the fact that retractions don't travel as far as headlines. That outrage spreads faster than truth. But this time, the volume of contradictions has become impossible to ignore. Even casual observers are starting to see it. Comment sections are shifting. Public sentiment is turning. People are asking uncomfortable questions about why Blake keeps redacting, why her filings are so dramatic, and why the court keeps rejecting her framing of events. The more Blake pushes, the more it looks like panic rather than confidence. And then there was the deposition meltdown that should never have happened. What should have been a routine conclusion to a long day of questioning turned into a bizarre power struggle. Blake's attorney demanded a recess with only minutes left. Baldoni's side pushed back, pointing out that the deposition was nearly finished and the witness wanted to wrap up. That should have been the end of it. Instead, it escalated into shouting, accusations of coaching, and an outright refusal to allow statements on the record. At one point, the witness was asked to leave the room like a child being punished. This wasn't advocacy. It was chaos. And once again, Blake's team tried to spin it as proof of Baldoni's misconduct. But when the transcript was read in full, it painted a very different picture. Calm resistance on one side. Emotional outbursts on the other. By the end of this phase of the case, one thing had become clear. Blake Lively's legal strategy is not built on evidence. It's built on distraction. On manufacturing conflict. On turning procedural disagreements into moral outrage. And on relying on media amplification to do the heavy lifting. But cracks are forming. The court isn't impressed. The judge isn't buying it. And the public is starting to connect the dots. This lawsuit began as a power move. A way to dominate the narrative and force Justin Baldoni into a defensive crouch. But as more documents are unsealed and more contradictions surface, that power is slipping. And this is only the beginning. Blake Lively just made her biggest mistake yet, and this time there's no PR spin strong enough to contain it. What started as a carefully curated narrative about emotional harm and alleged misconduct has now spiraled into something far uglier, messier, and far more revealing than Blake or her legal team ever intended. The internet isn't just watching anymore, it's dissecting, archiving, and cross-referencing every single filing, every redaction, every media leak, and every contradiction. And the more people look, the more Blake's story begins to collapse under its own weight. This isn't about a simple legal disagreement. This is about control, optics, and a desperate attempt to win a case in the court of public opinion because the actual courtroom isn't cooperating. Blake's legal team recently tried to pull off what might go down as one of the most embarrassing legal maneuvers of this entire saga. They submitted court filings where massive portions of a public court hearing were blacked out, treated as if they were confidential state secrets. The implication was obvious. They wanted the public to believe that what was hidden was explosive, damaging, and devastating to Justin Baldoni. But the problem with trying to rewrite reality is that courts don't play along. The judge ordered those transcripts unsealed, forcing Blake's team to remove the blackout bars. And once the full text was visible, the truth came out. There was nothing in those transcripts that supported Blake's dramatic claims. No abuse. No misconduct. No shocking revelations. If anything, the unsealed documents made Blake look worse, more erratic, more manipulative, and more willing to distort reality to fit a narrative she desperately needed to survive. This is the moment where the lawsuit stopped being about justice and officially turned into a circus. And Blake Lively isn't just a performer in it, she's the ringmaster, juggling half-truths and media leaks while Ryan Reynolds applauds from the sidelines, fully aware of how the game is played. For months, Blake has been feeding carefully worded stories to outlets like Variety and the Daily Mail, claiming Justin Baldoni's legal team was abusive, aggressive, and inappropriate during depositions. Headlines exploded. Social media reacted exactly the way her team hoped it would. People read the accusations, not the documents. But once the actual transcripts were released, something uncomfortable happened. The receipts didn't match the rhetoric. The transcript showed a very different reality, one where Baldoni's team was measured, professional, and focused on procedure, while Blake's side appeared defensive, reactive, and increasingly theatrical. One of the most glaring examples of this disconnect came from Blake's accusation that Baldoni's lawyers were asking invasive and inappropriate questions during depositions. That claim was repeated across media outlets as fact. But buried inside the actual court records was a detail Blake's team conveniently left out. Those questions were not directed at Blake at all. They were directed at an expert witness. A psychologist. That distinction matters. It matters legally, ethically, and narratively. Blake's legal team blurred that line on purpose, banking on the assumption that no one would bother to read the transcripts themselves. They were wrong. The expert witness in question, Dr. Nicole Alexander, specializes in body image and psychological trauma. She was brought in by Baldoni's defense to explain the standards required to substantiate claims of emotional damage. Her testimony didn't attack Blake personally. It didn't belittle her experiences. It simply laid out the professional criteria required to prove psychological harm. And that, apparently, was unacceptable to Blake's team. Instead of engaging with Dr. Alexander's testimony on its merits, Blake's lawyers reacted like their entire case had just been exposed for what it was. Emotional theater, not evidence. They accused Baldoni's team of misconduct. They claimed the deposition was hostile. They framed routine legal questioning as personal attacks. And when that narrative didn't hold up in court, they escalated. They filed for sanctions against Baldoni's lawyer, hoping the accusation alone would be enough to taint him in the public eye. On paper, a motion for sanctions sounds serious. It sounds like accountability. But once again, the substance didn't match the headline. When people actually read the 9 pages of deposition transcripts Blake's team submitted as proof, what they found was almost laughable. The so-called misconduct boiled down to grown adults arguing about whether to take a break. Literally. 9 pages of back and forth over stretching legs, time limits, and whether the deposition should pause. No threats. No insults. No abuse. Just procedural disagreement inflated into scandal because Blake's team needed something, anything, to distract from the fact that their core claims were unraveling. Even worse, Blake's lawyers attempted to suggest that Baldoni's team had asked Blake invasive personal questions about her body and sexual history. That accusation spread quickly, igniting outrage before anyone could verify it. But once again, the transcripts told a different story. Those questions were never aimed at Blake. They were part of a professional deposition involving Dr. Alexander, whose entire role was to discuss psychological standards related to body image and emotional distress. That's her job. That's why she was there. But Blake's team didn't want nuance. They wanted shock value. They wanted buzzwords. So they injected language like sexual misconduct and inappropriate behavior into their filings, knowing full well that the media would amplify it without context. And for a moment, it worked. Variety ran the story. Headlines implied Baldoni's team crossed lines. Social media reacted. But the court didn't buy it. The judge didn't side with Blake. Another attempt to weaponize public outrage fell flat inside the actual legal system, and then there are the redactions. The redactions deserve their own spotlight because they reveal more about Blake's strategy than any press release ever could. Blake's legal team has repeatedly filed documents riddled with blacked-out sections, even when those documents stem from public hearings. That's not just unusual. It's suspicious. Public hearings are, by definition, public. There is no legal basis to redact them unless there's something extraordinarily sensitive involved. And yet Blake's team continued to redact aggressively, as if hiding state secrets rather than routine courtroom dialogue. Each time the court forced them to refile unredacted versions, the result was the same. Nothing damaging to Baldoni was revealed. Instead, the unsealed documents consistently showed Blake's side acting combative, evasive, and overly dramatic. This raises an obvious question. Why would someone suing over emotional harm hide the very evidence that's supposed to support their claims? Why redact transcripts unless you're afraid that the truth will undermine your narrative? Every redaction buys time. Time to leak a carefully framed story to the press. Time to control the initial headlines. Time to let the accusation spread before the facts catch up. It's a delay tactic, and Blake's team has used it repeatedly. Seal the document. Leak the spin. Wait for the outrage. Then, when the real document is finally released, hope the public has already moved on. But that strategy only works for so long. Eventually, patterns emerge. And people start noticing that every time the blackout bars come off, Blake's story loses credibility.